One of the most common contentions regarding the conviction of Lucy Letby is that when she was removed from her nursing duties, deaths on the unit dried up almost completely. Now, it's well known that the unit was downgraded, and this is a major factor in this statistic, but the phenomenon was actually predicted at the time in emails, correspondence that was sent at the Countess of Chester in 2016. And I'm going to go over that in this video. So we can see here on the screen in a Reddit post of some years ago, I think a couple of years ago now, there's a discussion about Dr. John Gibbs featuring in the Trial of Lucy Letby podcast, who mentioned during this podcast that death stopped as soon as Letby was removed from the unit. Now, before we go any further, I want to say that Dr. John Gibbs is significantly more reasonable than Dr. Breary or Dr. J-Ram, and just seems to have been ushered along by them, essentially. But there's a couple of notes here about there being two significant changes to the unit, which is they reduced the number of babies that slept on the unit, and they increased the minimum gestation from 27 to 32 weeks. What isn't mentioned in this post is the downgrading of the unit. So these phenomena and this differing workload they were dealing with was defined by the fact that the unit was downgraded to the lowest possible neonatal unit, which has other consequences beyond those two that are mentioned here. But we'll get into that later. It's also mentioned here that Dr. Gibbs claimed that the fall in deaths was much bigger than the changes accounted for. In response to that, someone has said on Reddit, did he mention how he reached this conclusion? And as I understand, he's a paediatrician. What qualifies him to make such a statement? Of course, I would suggest that he didn't have any qualifications and it was just a rather flippant remark. But to his credit, in this email from the Thirlwell inquiry, this is an internal email from 2016. Dr. Gibbs writes here that the increase in neonatal mortality that we've experienced over the last 18 months might be with an expected statistical variance, but I'm not sure because my stats isn't good enough. So essentially, he talks about some of these statistical aspects of the case, but more importantly, he concedes that really he hasn't got any maths or statistics ability, knowledge, or qualifications. So when he's saying here that the fall is much greater than the changes should account for, we can reasonably assume that even if he had engaged in a significant investigation of this, mathematical investigation or statistical investigation, he's not qualified to do so. But it's highly unlikely that happened anyway. He probably just, what occurred on this unit so much is they had an impression about something and they just went with that impression. They didn't really do proper science or proper investigation. Dr. Gibbs was also cross-examined during the court case, and when he was asked by Ben Myers why he didn't contact the police sooner, he admitted that it was difficult because Nurse Letby seemed to be involved in all of the cases that involved me. So this just underlines that statistical coincidence can occur even with regard to doctors who tend to be less present on the unit because the nurses are essentially the first port of call for dealing with emergencies. So we're going to look at this email correspondence between four individuals that were involved with the Countess of Chester in 2016. And this email correspondence outlines the fact that the fall in deaths was absolutely predicted at the time. People were aware of it at the Countess of Chester. So the idea that it was some sort of revelation later on is completely without foundation. So the first of these four people is Corinne Slingo, who's a legal professional who was involved with the Countess of Chester at the time. It's stated here that Corinne now leads the National Healthcare Regulatory Team, advising on all aspects of healthcare law. She works in Bristol. I don't know if that's a new role for her, but this is what she does now, and she was involved in kind of medico-legal matters at the time. The second person is named in this document, People and Organisational Development from the Countess of Chester around this time, which is Sue Hodkinson, who was Director of Human Resources and Organisational Development at the hospital. The third person is named in this document, a Board of Directors Agenda and Papers from July 2017, and that is Debbie Cleverly. I don't think she's actually a PA. I think she's probably an administrator. You see she's mentioned here with regard to contacting a PA, so she probably performed some administrative duties at the hospital. And the fourth person is the first one mentioned here, Ian Pace, who was actually interviewed on the same day at the thermal inquiry, Thursday, 21st of November last year, along with Corinne Slingo, who's the first person that I mentioned, former legal advisor to the Countess of Chester. So in this email from July 2017, Corinne Slingo writes the following. Based on the fact that the only current evidence of any clinical concern is the potentially circumstantial fact that one particular nurse was on shift on more occasions than others at the point when neonatal deaths arose, and there are also death deteriorations that occurred when she was not on shift, and no incidents have been linked to their practice, and no previous concerns or whistleblowing has arisen in respect to the individual or the unit, and there is currently no cause of death or thematic clinical basis to suggest the deaths are connected to each other or connected by a common intervention, deliberate or not. And approximately 75% of the deaths have also been through the coronial system, with no common feature or issue arriving from the individual's care. So I wanted to highlight that firstly, because it's really Corinne Slingo recognising what so many of us have recognised since, which is that the incidents on the unit had already been investigated very thoroughly and no evidence of wrongdoing was found. Now, what should have happened at this time, if anything at all, it's arguable that nothing at all should have happened, because all they had was a couple of deaths where, I'm not sure the precise statistics at this point, I think it's one, isn't it? They had one unascertained or unexplained death, because this is in July 2017. Lucy's going to be removed from the unit at this time. So they had one unexplained or one unascertained death on the unit. So if anything, that's not an extraordinarily large number. It really isn't. However, if they were going to make further investigations at this point, what they should have done was a multidiscipline review. They should have contacted the top healthcare bodies and said, look, we want further expert analysis of these deaths because we're not 100% happy with the conclusions that have been drawn by two pathologists and a coroner, which would seem to be quite significant. And there should have been an extensive multidiscipline review, if anything. What should not have happened is this gentleman should not have been called in by the police and then given years and years and years to come up with countless explanations that came to the inevitable conclusion that Lucy Letby was guilty. This gentleman should never have been let near any court case ever again after what occurred in the famous case involving Lord Justice Jackson and other cases that we're now aware of. The next thing that Corinne Slingo states in her email is that from a patient safety perspective, the decision to move the individual to a non-clinical role is absolutely right. Irrespective of the right or wrongs of the suspicions cast upon her involvement in the heightened mortality issue, the individual will now be under enormous pressure, and that of itself creates additional patient safety risk that needed to be managed, and taking it offline from clinical duties does this. So I just wanted to mention this briefly because a lot of people talk about this. Corinne Slingo here is one of them. I'm going to make a video possibly next week at some point talking about another myth related to this case, which is the idea that Lucy was removed due to suspicion, which is just categorically untrue. That is not the reason she was removed from the unit, and this is outlined again here, although it's outlined in far more explicit and considerable depth elsewhere. So the critical paragraph of this email is here, where Corinne Slingo says, there is a likelihood that, having changed the admissions criteria to remove the highest risk of sub-32-week neonates, which I agree is the right step, that the mortality rate will drop significantly in any event, and that could easily be interpreted as being due to the removal of the individual as the timescales coincide. That may make life much more difficult for her, and also for the trust in trying to identify the true cause of the spike in mortality for this group of babies. So I just want to go over this again. So firstly, Corinne Slingo notes that they're going to change the admissions criteria, they're going to downgrade the unit, and they're not going to deal with at-risk neonates. It's going to be a very low-level unit. In these circumstances, it's likely that the mortality rate will drop significantly, and that this could be interpreted as being due to the removal of Lucy Letby as the timescales coincide. She then rightly notes that this could make life a lot more difficult for her, and as a kind of side issue, that it would make it harder to identify what was causing the spike in mortality. So this is essentially quite an astute comment from Corinne Slingo that has obviously Dr. Brewery and Dr. Jairam have completely disregarded this if it was ever made aware to them. But it indicates very clearly it was communicated to the hospital, not one person in the hospital. This is an email chain. There are several people that are aware of this now, that it's likely that the mortality rate is going to drop because of simply the downgrading of the unit. So any suggestion that, and this was used evidentially, it was used in court, it's been constantly cited, it's been cited by consultants on the unit, it's been cited by people that are determined to believe that Lucy Letby is guilty. Oh, the death stopped when she came off the unit. But actually, not only was there an explanation for this that is entirely reasonable, but someone provided this explanation before it was investigated at the very time that it happened. So the other email from Corinne Slingo that I wanted to highlight was from April 2017. This was yet another document that was only released after the Thirlwell inquiry's public process ended. INQ 00003088. Again, this is an email with Sue Hodkinson. In this email, Corinne Slingo essentially outlines the fact that the neonatal unit mortality concern has been investigated in several ways. Firstly, by the Royal College Review that we all know about, that identified no single root cause nor expressly confirmed avoidable deaths and outlined several criticisms. The report has been shared with both the Care Quality Commission and the coroner. She also cites the Forensic Pathology Review, also shared with key stakeholders, a review of each case by the medical director. I'm not sure what form the output from this may have taken. This will be relevant for next steps. And she goes on to talk about the police investigation. An HR investigation following a grievance brought by the nurse, and close liaison has continued with HM coroner, including meetings to share the outcome of investigations in order to give the coroner the opportunity to reopen inquests or take any other steps. As discussed, the coroner has a statutory power to refer matters within his jurisdiction to the police if he's concerned a crime may have been commissioned, and thus far this has not happened. So it shouldn't have happened. It shouldn't have happened because when it was referred to the police, there was no evidence whatsoever. That's explicitly stated in Cheshire Police documents, not just one, several documents, numerous times, that they had no evidence when it was passed to them. It's only when Dr. Brewery and Dr. Jairam go to visit Cheshire Police that they decide to have an investigation. The point here, though, is that Corinne Slingo is outlining that the deaths have been investigated in numerous different ways. She didn't actually reference the fact the Care Quality Commission visited the hospital as well, although they did a tremendously bad job, as usual. And despite all those investigations, there's been no evidence of wrongdoing. And as mentioned here, the coroner, who has a statutory power, and I would say pretty much a statutory obligation to refer matters if they were concerned that there'd been a crime, has not done so because there's no evidence for this. So I think it's pretty outrageous that the medical director, Ian Harvey, has been hauled over the coals so publicly, and I think treated abominably, when the record at Thirlwell that is contained in the documents that have been submitted to the inquiry indicates quite clearly that he's behaved absolutely appropriately and professionally at all times. This is something I'll probably go into in future videos. I've written about this very extensively in my book because there's so much information from Thirlwell in these documents that somehow the inquiry never discussed. But we know exactly what was going on behind the scenes at this hospital. That is undeniable because it's all there in black and white. And I think I don't know what quite the right word is. I think horrifying that Ian Harvey's had to flee his home because, he must have felt threatened. He's had to leave his home permanently because there's people outside threatening him because all they've heard in the media is Ian Harvey was harbouring a murderer and protecting a murderer. I mean, it's disgraceful. Obviously, it's not as bad as what's happened to Lucy, but it is pretty bad and it's completely unjustified. So on the Wikipedia page for the Countess of Chester, it's noted that the ward was downgraded following the suspicious collapses and deaths over the summer of 2016, resulting in high dependency babies no longer be treated there. The Wikipedia page also claims that the restrictions have, as of March 2025, been partly lifted. So I investigated this a little further and found this to be a pretty dubious statement. So I found this website, Northwest Neonatal, which talks about the units that operate within this area of the NHS. And sure enough, there's the Countess of Chester Hospital. Now you can see its current status is that it's a local neonatal unit currently accepting babies 32 weeks and above. Now I want to emphasise this link is the link that is cited in the Wikipedia article. You can see here number 13. The restrictions have been partly lifted. That takes you here. And then you see this. So there's no indication that they're taking babies under the 32-week gestation, firstly. Secondly, they claim here that the Countess of Chester is now a local neonatal unit. So a local neonatal unit, sometimes referred to as level 2 unit, is for babies who need a high level of medical care and for babies born after 27 weeks gestation and weigh over 1,000 grams. So I can't see any evidence whatsoever that, as is suggested here, that the restrictions have been partly lifted. This could be something of an administrative. It's not really even an administrative decision. I was going to say it's not really even a decision because nothing has changed. It's just altering the labelling, perhaps to try and, I would suggest, make people feel a little bit more comfortable about their baby staying on this unit. But really, realistically, nothing has changed since 2016 when the unit was downgraded, which is now, of course, coming up to 9 years ago. They're still not accepting babies that they were accepting during the period dealt with in the court case, which is those that are under 32 weeks gestation. So we've seen this document a few times in previous videos. This is a list of deaths that occurred on the neonatal unit in Chester. We see straight away baby A, gestation weeks 31, so that baby wouldn't be allowed on the unit. Even now, nearly a decade later, 30 weeks, that baby wouldn't be allowed on the unit. 29, that baby wouldn't. 20, we see some of the mentioned before, some of the non-indictment babies are full termers that would be allowed on the unit. So baby I, 27 weeks. 28, 30, 29, all these babies would not be allowed on the neonatal unit today. The majority of the infants lifted here. Ironically, some of the babies that died that weren't involved in the court case would be allowed on the neonatal unit at this time. And then in addition to that, child G was born at 23 weeks and child K was born at 25 weeks. So the infants they were actually dealing with, well over the majority of them that have been cited as being on the unit at that time and that passed away or that were involved in the court case, approximately 2/3 of them, I would estimate, wouldn't be on the unit now, which is obviously hugely significant. So to return to the topic and the overarching subject of this video, there is this recognition from Corinne Slingo in this email that as soon as you change the admissions criteria on this unit, removing the highest risk sub 32-week neonates, the mortality rate will drop. So the fact that it has since been cited in so many different ways as being suspicious, it's not only not suspicious, not only are there legitimate and satisfactory reasons to explain this, but also it wasn't a mystery at the time. It's not something that was unexpected. This significantly precedes the case being referred to the police, let alone the court case, and yet this is still being repeated in court. It's still being repeated by people that believe that Lucy Letby is guilty today, even though way back in 2016, 9 years ago now, this email is just under 9 years old, 8 years and 9 months old, this email from Corinne Slingo. She already knew that the mortality rate was going to drop. And she told them, so the hospital knew at the time that they could expect a significant drop in mortality, and this was just never taken into consideration, seemingly. I suppose that you could say it was taken into consideration by certain individuals at the hospital, but still it was referred to the police. Still the case referred to the police, and there is this very critical meeting between Brewery Jairam and a guy called Nigel Wenham, where they provide him with information. And one of the things that they state is that deaths on the unit have dried up, and we still have unexplained deaths from this period, and we don't know why they occurred. And that's very troubling. And they say various other things as well. But this idea that the death stopped because Lucy came off the unit, not only is there a reasonable explanation for that, but as I say, it wasn't really a mystery at the time. So again, thank you very much for the support, particularly across recent videos. I'm going to try to keep posting on a regular basis. I had to do a quick one here today because the second part of the insulin cases video is going to take a long time. There's a lot of court transcripts to go through, and I want to cut that down as much as possible because a lot of it's quite boring. I looked at some of the videos from another channel that I'm sure you're familiar with, and it is just him reading out court transcripts, and it just goes on for hours. Like, because in court they just go, "Is your name Lucy? Yes. Is your surname Letby? Yes. Do you live?" I mean, I'm being facetious, but they'll just, "Do you recognise this object? Yes. What is this object? It's a stethoscope. Do you know what a stethoscope is used for? Yes. Could you explain?" Literally, it will go on like this. And they just read them out. So I want to minimise that as much as possible, but I do need to go over the court transcripts for a couple of things. I think the insulin cases, I think the videos collectively could be, I don't know, 10 hours, 15 hours. I don't know. But I want each part to be as digestible as possible. So I've kind of prepped that, but I didn't have time to record it fully yet. So I wanted to do a shorter video. As I get more and more into the swing of things, we're doing this. I'll try to do one long video, then one short video. It'll give me a little bit longer to prepare the longer videos and give something interesting to watch in the meantime. So thanks again. If you have any comments, queries, corrections, or anything else, please do share them. I really enjoy reading what you have to say. It's always very constructive.